Good morning, everybody. I'm Violetta Kerr. I'm excited to welcome you to the Open Scholarship Commons. If you haven't been here before, welcome. This is a newer space in the libraries. It's an interdisciplinary space really designed to support best practices for creating and sharing research with wider audiences and helping to make the impact of research visible to the world. So we're really excited today to host the Open Scholarship Commons Community Fellows workshops. These are workshops that were designed and are delivered by graduate students who are underrepresented in the field of open scholarship. So our fellows have been working really hard throughout this year. They were selected in the fall through a competitive process, winter quarter. They spent a lot of time working on developing these workshops along with mentors, and got feedback on workshops in a really great dress rehearsal last week. So we're really proud of what our fellows have accomplished through this program and excited to have you here today to celebrate with us the culmination of this program. I want to take a brief moment to thank our co-sponsors for the program, the eScience Institute and the Diversity Seed Grant, who helped make the workshops possible. And then after our workshop today, you'll notice up front here we have some snacks. So we invite you to come have some snacks and continue this conversation about qualitative data with Yubing and other folks who are attending the workshop today. So without further ado, I'm really pleased to turn things over to Yubing.
Sure. Well, thank you, Violetta, for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. My name is Yubing Tian. Oh, hi, Paul. I'm a PhD candidate in the Information Science program here at UW. I proposed this workshop because throughout my past 5 years here, I've worked on various research projects, including my own dissertation project, and they have all in some form or shape involved qualitative research and specifically interviews. And I think what sparked the idea is I have shared some of the interview data, either through protocols or transcripts in various locations, and there wasn't much guidance, and it surprised me like how much work it took to do that sharing in a considerate way, but also in a hopefully helpful manner for future reusers. Okay, so what will we be covering today's workshop? This workshop is really in two parts. In the first part, I'll discuss some reasons why you may wish to share your interview data, but together with that, we'll discuss some of the epistemological as well as ethical concerns that come with having to share this type of data. In the second part, I'll present some options of what materials researchers are sharing, as well as some locations you may consider for doing that sharing. We'll also discuss some curation strategies and techniques for sharing your interview data, whilst dealing at the same time with maybe some epistemological or ethical concerns that will cover the first part of the workshop. So hopefully the two will relate to each other. And then, as you can see, there's part 3 and 6. There's some interactive activities. I have an online document as well as some printed handouts that we'll do together. And then if there's time, there's also time for Q&A. And I would love to hear about your own projects as well and what questions you have. Okay, so without further ado, why share your interview data? There are many reasons, but I want to highlight a couple. First, sharing data is thought to support transparency in research. This concept of transparency is closely tied to those of research replicability, reproducibility, and validity. However, these are typically not concerns or the specific language that qualitative researchers use to talk about our work. However, for example, perhaps sharing the specific part of the transcript that helps support your claims provides additional justification and evidence for reviewers as well as readers of your work. Second, reusers or secondary users of your data can create new knowledge from what is already existing. So another way to think about it is with the same resources, you are maximizing the impact of limited funds as well as participants' time. And specifically, I think the second part, maybe more than the first part, resonates with qualitative researchers. We want to be mindful of research fatigue in over-researched communities and reduce that when possible. Third, your interview data, whether that's the actual transcripts or just the protocols, like the questions you wrote to guide the interview, actually make for really excellent teaching materials. There was a study done maybe now 5 years ago by Libby Bishop in the UK about why reusers downloaded qualitative data from a data archive. And the vast majority, 65% of respondents replied that it was to help them learn. And I can say from personal experience, I have searched for protocols to look at how other researchers have drafted questions pertaining to my topic. So, just to see what's out there, whether I think the phrasing makes sense for my work. So that has helped me in the beginning stages of my PhD when I was new to interviewing. The very last one is say none of the previous reasons really resonate or apply with you or to you. The last reason is increasingly federal funding agencies as well as journals, say you don't have to think about a grant, have data sharing requirements. And so that is increasingly maybe the option or the reason why you may be in this situation. So what are some concerns or barriers that you as a qualitative researcher might have with sharing your interviews? And I think the way I'm choosing to present it is one set of concerns relate to research epistemology, and the second one is more the ethical concerns that you may have. So really debates about epistemological concerns have been an ongoing part of the literature since the late or mid 1990s, so about 30 years at this point. And really at the core of this body of work, what scholars are concerned with are this question of decontextualization or whether interview data and qualitative data more broadly can be appropriately reused outside of their original context. So where do these sort of concerns stem from? And I think my understanding of it is that they mainly stem from the process of how qualitative data are generated in the first place. So for one, they are contextual, meaning that interview data are a joint artifact of not only your participants' experiences, perceptions, values, and beliefs, but you, the researcher or interviewer as well. And so they are co-created together by the interviewer and participants. And not only that, but the researcher is part of and not separate from the data that they create. So we can think of this, for example, through the choice of the specific research topic, but also the phrasing of interview questions, the stance or type of rapport you have with your interviewees, as well as like which questions or topics to follow up with during the interview itself. And all of these choices on behalf of the researcher end up reflected in some way in the final interview transcript. So that was the very brief summary of epistemological concerns relating to potential reuse. The second one related to potential reuse is how to share interview data without harming your participants. There's a lot of ethical concerns, and the three I wish to highlight today are the following. The first is regarding informed consent. This is, of course, an ongoing process, but participants may have consented to participating in your research, so the interview itself, but you may need to ask for reconsent for wider sharing beyond the primary research team. And I think thinking about it or the reconsent process is a little weird if we think about it. It's the primary researcher asking their interviewees on behalf of future unknown secondary researchers and or other non-research people. So I think also then giving that in context is like a kind of temporality mismatch, but also like on behalf of unbeknownst people. So really depending on your research topic and the type of rapport you have with your participants, this can be quite tricky to navigate because it involves questions of power and trust. So there may be instances where maybe your participants might not feel like they can say no to you. And so just to be careful about those types of dynamics when asking for such a broad type of reconsent or permission. Second, researchers are concerned about another type of future concern. It is impossible to know and anticipate all the ways that your data can be reused. And so I think probably an edge case, but it is a real concern, is that of misuse or specifically like inappropriate reinterpretation or retheorization using you and your participants' work. So one sort of very generic example might be you interview some climate scientists, you ask them about their research process, you ask how they deal with uncertainties in their work and communicate that to the public. And you might imagine that gets deposited to some repository and then maybe gets into the hands of climate denialists. A very extreme example, but then the original work of climate scientists working on climate change research has sort of become twisted and become used for almost the opposite political project or agenda. The last of the three ethical concerns is preserving confidentiality. So whether you are thinking about collecting interviews or you have already, you know that you will probably have a ton of both direct and indirect identifiers in your transcript. And the difference between the two are whether they are specifically unique to a person or maybe they're not unique to that individual, such as a zip code or birth date. Like many individuals may share the same birth date, but together with other direct or indirect identifiers, it can be used to sort of form a picture of that person and re-identify them. So here I have a couple examples on the slide. Direct identifiers we know are full name, SSN, indirect identifiers, someone's age, zip code, but of course, these are very generic. They'll probably be more specific and different in your individual research projects. Another layer I want to add to the potential re-identification of your participants is that of deductive disclosure. And this is a term that Sai and colleagues use to define when participants are likely to identify each other. And this will probably be super context dependent and specific to your project, but this includes information that you probably wouldn't find in any list of like known identifiers, whether direct or indirect. And so some examples may be an individual specific manner of speaking, or they use a specific phrase very often, and that is something that is likely known to people who know that individual. Or perhaps they have a very uncommon occupation. And so all these things are outside of a specific context, are not identifying, but may become so in your individual projects. So some study characteristics that kind of lend themselves to deductive disclosure include small scale communities. And this doesn't mean like isolated, rural, middle of nowhere, like small town. It could be you are interviewing maybe a small subreddit, there are only like 50 users, or you research a very tightly connected field of scientists and they probably most likely know each other's work. Another one is use of respondent-driven sampling. I myself, I think, have used a lot of snowball sampling, but then that brings into question deductive disclosure, and especially when your participants are helping you basically create your interviewee pool, they will likely know of others or recognize them in the final artifacts. Okay, so now there's an activity for you all. I have a couple of printed versions as well, but I'm hoping that you all can access through the barcode or the link, and then you can download the Google Doc. And basically there's two activities today. The first one is I will be asking you to skim 3 hypothetical interview collections and then choosing the one that speaks to you most or the one that is closest to your own work. Think through at least one sort of epistemological as well as some ethical questions or concerns you may have. And then I'm hoping we can gather back at 10:27, so in 10 minutes, and then discuss what you all have written. Okay, it is 10:27. I hope that was enough time to do the activity. So let's discuss. Did anyone work with Collection 1, PhD Student Wellbeing and Academic Journeys, and would like to share what they have written for any concerns that they might have if they were sort of working with this collection of interviews on this topic? Yeah. I'll just repeat for the Zoom. So one concern with the PhD student and academic journeys collection is if they're talking about their relationship with their advisors and any details, in particular negative experiences, might further harm their existing advisor-advisee relationship. Anyone else who worked on collection 1, if you have any other things you would like to add? That's such an interesting one. So this one is more about the topic and the relationship between the interviewer and the interviewee, where they're discussing mental health, and it might get blurry, sort of the dynamic. Did I recap that well? Okay. Did anyone work with the second collection on climate change and field biologists and would like to share? Yeah, totally. I'll just sum up really quickly. So there were, I think I caught, it was very complex, your thought, and you had many excellent points. But I think the first one was being clear about the purpose of why you're even doing this interview project. Second, like considering maybe splitting up the artifacts or like areas of the transcript. And then third, even something like researching a specific species can become identifying for the person risk re-identification. So those were all excellent points. Let me just keep an eye on time. Okay. What about collection 3, navigating parenting challenges, online forums? For sure. So for collection 3, the concern is that, or it's a bit complicated because in this scenario, the users are anonymous, but then the interviewer knows the identity of the user. And then they're posting anonymously online. So that's kind of semi-public, the online part. And so really thinking about using that online artifact to then re-identify the person. Okay, well, thank you all. Those were all excellent points. We'll shift gears into the second part where we talk about, with all these concerns in mind, what are some options that you may wish to consider in terms of like what you share, where you do it, and how much to share of your work through sort of curating your interview artifacts. So where is interview data being shared? In various places, but I would say the most common in our academic sort of circles are through oral presentations at conferences. Usually when discussing the findings, it's convention to maybe show a verbatim quote or an edited quote to support your claims. And that is true also for publications, as well as maybe more so monographs, so books on a topic. I think this is less common in qualitative work, but I've seen this in some mixed methods work where folks will have basically their own professional website and then maybe have a separate project website where they will upload interview materials together with some other data, but that is also an option. And the fourth option is data repositories. And there are many types to choose from, and it will depend on your aim or even thinking about what type of reuser you expect would most benefit from this type of work. So you can consider general repositories such as Zenodo or Figshare, and these are general meaning that they don't really specifically curate by data type or topic. They basically accept a wide range of projects and data. And also, I believe UW has now a relationship or partnership with Dryad, which also falls under the general repositories category. So that is also something to consider. You can also think about specialized repositories. So there's ICPSR, which is the world's largest social science data archive based at University of Michigan. There's also qualitative data repository at Syracuse and many others. And the benefits maybe of going with a specialized repository is that usually they'll have curators and librarians on staff where you can collaborate with them to help curate and maybe de-anonymize, do all that data management work to protect your participants, all of that stuff together with a librarian curator. Another good option are institutional repositories. So UW have ResearchWorks, and usually these are associated with a university's library. And I would say, thinking about repositories, the reason why you would choose them over maybe, say, like a professional website is they do have longer chances, they facilitate long-term preservation versus just like an immediate access to your work. So thinking about how long you want to share your work for. And so what exactly is being shared? As I alluded to earlier, there are quotes. These are varied lengths. This might be like maybe one or two sentences. So sometimes I've also seen sort of something more substantial around a paragraph if they're really going through an anecdote in the finding section. Personally, I've also just deposited and also seen others deposit your interview guide. So the questions, as well as the protocol and the workflow around that. And that can be an option if, say, you can't think of a way or it just doesn't suit your project to deposit other materials, such as interview transcripts, de-anonymized, of course. Those are an option. I would say interview audio is quite rare, but are common in specific subfields, such as in history, where oral history interviews are a method. And then there's also some creative alternatives, such as plays, poetries. I think I've seen this most in anthropology, where these artifacts or creative forms of expression are based on their ethnographic research and interviews with their participants. But I would say the top three are the most common of what exactly is being shared when it comes to interviews. So sort of to introduce, now that we've talked about where you can share, what you can share, circling back to part one, how can we do this responsibly and ethically? Well, Karcher and all basically suggests, and I think I tend to agree with, that we can do this through curation and data management. And essentially, you want to do so in a way that both sort of protects your participants, but also allows secondary reusers with enough details and context to be able to learn about that collection of transcripts about the data they're reusing, which in turn sort of allows them to shape justifiable beliefs based on those data. So there's like sort of a tension that is in this act of curation. You want to remove context that may be identifying or is a risk for re-identification, but then you also want to ensure that enough details are left for future reusers so that they can not like misinterpret or misappropriate your work. So tension there. So let's talk through some curation strategies, and there'll be a lot. You could choose one, a couple. They're not mutually exclusive, and they can be done throughout the sort of research cycle. So during data collection, you may consider data minimization, which is collecting as little information as possible, or essentially like usually there's a part where you greet the person, you maybe chit chat a little bit, consider not turning on the recorder then and doing so later. And that can be part of your workflow or your protocol as well. Another good way is member checking. So having your transcript checked by your interviewees. Often what I have done is at the end of the interview, we'll say to research participants, like, hey, if anything comes to mind that you wish you hadn't said, or like a particular response to a question you want us to remove, like, please just let us know. And we'll do that, we'll remove it. Another reason why you may want to do the member checking, especially when considering wider sharing, is again, the interviewee may have been comfortable responding in a way to you, given that it was sort of a one-on-one conversation, even though they know it's for research. But then having that sort of in a repository for a really long period of time might, might create other considerations for them. They may wish to strike out certain things or words that they used. So sort of in the data management category or process, we have various techniques or strategies you may wish to consider. A very common one is using pseudonyms for your research participants. So essentially what this does is that it removes direct identifiers, but not indirect identifiers. So here I have an example. The original is, during my astrophysics PhD at UW, I worked closely with my advisor, John Smith. This is totally purely fictional. I don't even know if there's a astrophysics PhD at UW. But then the curated one is, you would say you would essentially keep everything, but just give a pseudonym to the advisor. And then for any other identifying details. You may consider deleting or redacting direct identifiers. And so this is how it would appear in the transcript. The actual name is redacted. It can also be like a black marker or just removed entirely. So the sentence would end with advisor with no name. Sort of a variation on the previous two is anonymization. Here you would want to manipulate both direct and indirect identifiers, either removing them or somehow manipulating them together. So using the same example here, we have during my STEM in brackets indicating to reusers that something has been changed. PhD at UW, I work closely with my advisor, same pseudonym, Adam Anderson, very generic. This one I found out recently, and I haven't had a chance to use myself, but I'm very excited by the possibility, and that is blurring data. The aim of it is it removes precision and detail, but retains some contextual information. So in terms of using this strategy or technique, the authors, I believe was Campbell et al., suggested that for numeric information, replace the exact data or information with an interval or some kind of other broader generalization. So here, the original is, I joined the University of Washington in 2019. Using this technique, if you were to curate it, it would say something like, I joined the University of Washington between 2015 and 2019. So there's a broader interval and is less of a re-identification risk. Another option is, instead of a numeric interval, you could give a description. So the late 2010s, for example. And then for non-numeric information, you would replace it with a more generalized term. So maybe what's identifying is not the year, but the location, depending on what you're researching. So you could say, I joined a large public university in 2019. And I think this one has a lot of potential, and sort of the categories you use are totally up to you. You have domain knowledge and also like expertise in your project as well. Lastly, there are still some more options you can choose in terms of sharing. One is obfuscation. So key details such as when dates occurred or locations are replaced. And I first came across this in Stephen Hill-Gartner's monograph, and he was writing about his ethnographic research in genomic labs during sort of the early 2000s, where there was the Human Genome Project, and there was a lot of like contentions, or I guess, there was a lot of, it seems, drama between different labs. And then in the introduction to this book, he wrote that we should, as readers, just be aware that key details have been modified, and he will not be letting us know when that happened. So for example, he wrote like a lab in the East Coast might actually be in the South, or like an event that occurred in 2006 may have occurred in 2004. And so that is obfuscation. And I think the aim is to sort of still have all the richness, but then doing that data curation in your writing up of your research. Another thing to consider is not just single pseudonyms, which I think is a pretty common practice, like each participants get their own pseudonym, but consider using multiple pseudonyms, 2 or more for each participant. And this is because in manuscripts, in particular, if you're publishing a lot, like say you have a body of 4 or 6 articles on a particular collection, people might start to recognize each other through different quotes that appear across these publications. So consider assigning more than one pseudonym per participant. And then the last one is working with, say you're working with a repository, you're sharing your data, maybe through ICPSR, you can work with the repository staff to control access to your collections. So maybe you've identified, okay, these 3 transcripts are okay for anyone to access, but this other collection of maybe 8, for example, we need to have people apply or ask for permission in order to download. Or some other thing, like it can be embargoed for a certain number of years, which means it will be in the repository, but it will not be released to the public until, I think typically the standard is 2 years later. So those are some options. Just really briefly, I'm taking a look at time. I think really it's very context dependent, what information you curate and how you do so. But I think I found this heuristic helpful, these sets of questions, thinking about who else would know that information, how they would know it, and what other records contain that information. It's a bit abstract, but I think if you think through a specific interview project you may have done, it becomes a bit more concrete. And then you can choose a specific curation strategy, and those are not mutually exclusive. Okay, so there's a second part of the activity. It's the same document. And again, I ask that you choose one interview collection. You can choose the same one that you did for part one or a different one. And I basically ask you to choose curatorial practices and ascribe a reason to why you think that's appropriate. Okay, we will gather back, I don't know, in 10 minutes, 10:59. I don't know, Berlin, do you think it's, yeah, yeah. Oh, okay, 6 minutes at 10:55. Oh, that was the slide for the share back. Okay, so to conclude, I hope I illustrated that there is no sort of one size fits all solution, unlike maybe quantitative data or other types of data. And so there are many factors to consider and balance when deciding, like, first of all, whether to share your interview data at all. And if you choose to do so, like what, how, and where to do that sharing. And these are just a couple of the things that may influence your decision, like one way or another. It may include like federal funding policies. They might require you to deposit your work in a specific repository, so that kind of eliminates your choice there, but also might be journal policies, might be disciplinary norms. Maybe all your peers deposit at ICPSR, so you may wish to do that. And also there's your own personal epistemological considerations, the ethical ones we talked about, but also really depends on your research methods, such as if you're using respondent-driven sampling, you might wish to think more about deductive disclosure, the specific topic you're working on, and how sensitive it is. And of course, last but not least, like your research participants, your relationship with them, and how much they shared with you and sort of all of that. So a lot to juggle. Yeah, so I'll leave you with that note. Thank you so much for coming. Like Wednesday in the morning when it's really gloomy. I can be reached here if you have emails. If you have emails and questions, please reach me here. And thank you to UW Libraries, the Open Scholarship Commons, as well as the eScience Institute for supporting this work. I had a lot of fun. Thank you.